What if, suddenly, all the lies you've woven throughout your life started to wrap around you like a web, each strand tightening just a little more, demanding a truth you're not ready to face? I am Lucius Eternus, the angel of death. I've walked the earth's surface since ancient times, always solitary, present at the most final moments of people's lives. I truly don't know if being an angel is a gift or a penance. I'm not the shadow lurking in the dark, but the mirror that reflects what you've always tried to avoid. Today, I'm here to tell the story of Thomas Caldwell, a man who believed that his lies could keep the weight of truth at bay. In the silence of an ordinary morning, Thomas Caldwell discovered that sometimes the heaviest burden to carry isn't just guilt, but the truth that was never spoken. Every step he took was a step closer to his final moment, where the lies he had so carefully constructed began to unravel, not as shields but as weights bound to his ankles, dragging him toward the inevitable. And you, hearing my voice now, ask yourself, what is holding your steps? Today is the day of Thomas's death. The mark of the end is upon his head, a shadow that cannot be washed away. And as I, Lucius Eternus, watch him descend the marble stairs of his apartment, each step resounding like the ticking of a clock that cannot be slowed, I see more than just a man heading to his morning routine. I see a restless spirit, a heart that never knew true peace, a soul that thinks it has evaded its own reflection for long enough. In the room where Thomas took his morning meals, everything was prepared with almost cruel precision. The fine porcelain cup, the hot coffee exuding its pungent aroma, the freshly baked croissants lined up like soldiers ready for battle. Thomas sits down, seeking comfort in the ritual that so often offered him a false sense of security. He lifts the cup, feels the reassuring warmth in his palm, and for a brief moment, he believes he can cheat the inevitable once again. But as he brings the cup to his lips, a cold wind sweeps behind him, raising the hairs on the back of his neck, as if the universe itself were whispering in his ear, "Today, you will face the truth. On the day of your death, you will have signs. Not the ones you want, but the ones you need to understand." Thomas pauses, the cup suspended in the air, feeling the weight of a presence that cannot be explained. It's not the cold that makes him shiver, but the clear realization that something invisible, something he cannot see but feels deeply, is with him. His restless mind searches for a rational explanation. He looks around, his eyes scanning every corner of the room, searching for an escape from this overwhelming feeling of being watched. But there is nothing, just the weight of the air, as if the very environment were breathing with him, watching, waiting. He tries to ignore the discomfort, taking a sip of coffee, but the taste is empty, like the redemption he never truly sought. What once was comfort is now unease. He shouts for his maid, irritated, accusing her of ruining his coffee, but in truth, he tastes the truth he can no longer ignore. Today, something is different. The melancholy that envelopes him isn't just a passing mood, it's the prelude to something greater, a warning that all his lies are finally demanding their toll. Thomas Caldwell, a religious man who turned faith into wealth, who traded purity for lust, who was supposed to guide souls to the light but became a false guide, is in his last day on earth. He doesn't know it yet, but every breath he takes brings him closer to his inevitable end. And as he desperately tries to find comfort in his routine, the world around him has already begun to change, responding to his own restlessness. Because the truth, like death, is never as distant as we believe. And it always finds a way to reveal itself. Even as the discomfort grew within him, Thomas Caldwell chose to stick to his routine, as if the repetition of the same actions could shield him from whatever life was about to throw his way. I watched him as he left his luxurious apartment. Outside, the morning sun's warmth was replaced by an unexpected breeze, gentle, yet carrying with it an ominous foreboding, as though something unforeseen was on the horizon. When Thomas got into his car, the sound of the engine, once a comforting noise of daily life, now seemed like a distant lament, a sound that reverberated in his mind, amplifying the unease he was desperately trying to ignore. As he drove through the city streets, memories he had fought so hard to suppress began to surface from the depths. These weren't just fragments of the past, but vivid scenes of corruption, lust, extortion, images as real as the world around him. Every face that flashed in his mind bore the mark of betrayal, of broken trust. He had always convinced himself that his actions were justifiable, that greed and avarice were mere tolls for the power he wielded. But now, with each image that passed before his eyes, he realized that his lies had created a burden he could no longer bear. One memory in particular stood out, a young woman, sobbing as she confessed her sins. Instead of offering comfort, he exploited her weaknesses to increase her donations, fueling his luxurious lifestyle. Now, her face, twisted in despair, seemed to haunt him. Every tear she shed became a drop of acid, corroding his soul. And as I watched his silent struggle, I asked myself, or perhaps you who listen to me now, what truly defines a man? His deeds or the sins he so carefully hides? Arriving at the club, I saw Thomas desperately trying to regain his composure. He smiled at the doorman, but his smile was hollow, soulless. As he walked through the opulent hall, I noticed how the bright lights seemed more intense, almost blinding, as if they were trying to reveal every shadow he had carefully nurtured over the years. With each step, the feeling of being watched, judged, grew within him like a storm about to break. His heart raced for no apparent reason, each beat a cruel reminder of the time he had wasted. During lunch with Tiffany, his mistress, Thomas struggled to keep up appearances. His laughter was forced, his smiles a facade. Every word that left his mouth was empty, like the sound of a broken bell. As she spoke of trivial matters, the memories of his sordid actions tightened around his heart like a cold hand, squeezing ever tighter. He tried to focus on her words, but the room seemed to spin around him, each sip of wine burning his throat as if it were a bitter taste of the price of his lies. As the afternoon wore on, I watched him and saw the silent battle he fought within himself. The images of his life, of every act of manipulation and deceit, came like waves, each more painful than the last. He saw himself not as the spiritual guide he pretended to be, but as an imposter, a mercenary of faith who fed on the pain of his followers. One particularly painful memory returned, a poor, elderly man, full of faith, who sought his guidance. Thomas promised prayers and blessings in exchange for a generous donation. Now, the grateful look in the man's eyes, mixed with Thomas's own greed, was like a blade cutting through his conscience. And I, Lucius Eternus, angel of death, watched him invisibly, waiting for the right moment to sever the silver cord that tied his soul to his body. For I know, as everyone should, that the truth, no matter how painful, is inevitable. It does not hide in darkness, but shines brightly, waiting to be seen. And Thomas Caldwell's truth was beginning to manifest, no longer just in his mind, but now also in his body. At first, the discomfort was just a slight prick, but now it was becoming unbearable. Thomas's heart beat irregularly, his breathing grew heavier, and the pressure in his chest increased, as if the weight of his lies was finally taking its toll. He tried to maintain his composure, tried to hide the fear he felt, but his body was beginning to give way. Each step he took through the club seemed more difficult, each breath more labored. The truth, the relentless truth, was finally emerging, and he knew there was no escape. Then, as he walked down the club corridor, he bumped into a man he had never seen before, a stranger with an unsettling presence, a man in a suit who radiated an invisible authority. This man was me, Lucius. And in my brief moment of interaction with Thomas, I sought to help him redeem himself, even though I knew it was too late. Thomas, I said, sometimes, if we repent with all our heart, our soul can be set free. He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. For a moment, I saw the struggle within him. But when he blinked, I had already disappeared. He wondered if he had really seen me, or if his mind was playing tricks on him. Perhaps it was a final act of mercy that the universe had granted him, or perhaps it was simply the weight of his own illusions. Later, back home, an overwhelming urge to confess took hold of Thomas. He felt the need to record a video and post it on social media, revealing the truth about his life of lies. He thought about donating all his wealth, all the possessions he had acquired. He sat in front of his computer, started recording, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. The fear of losing everything, of being exposed, was greater than his need for redemption. Trembling, he deleted the video before finishing, unable to go through with it. For, after all, the truth, no matter how much he wanted it, was too heavy a burden for him to carry to the end. Thomas Caldwell's final hour was nearing. I, Lucius Aeternus, was ready to fulfill my duty, as I had done countless times before. But every soul is unique, and every encounter with death brings its own truth, a revelation that only those departing can truly see. Even as an angel of death, you might think I am emotionless, indifferent to you humans. But no, I feel your turmoil. I live through your emotions with you. I get moved. I always want to help you lead this life in the best way possible, my friend. You all have your worth. Thomas felt the world around him start to spin. The dizziness, once just a distant breeze, now turned into an internal storm, a swirling force threatening to unravel the thin thread keeping him in this world. In the living room, the place where he had so often sought refuge from reality, suddenly transformed into a gilded cage. The luxurious surroundings, once a symbol of his status and power, now seemed like a trap of his own making. Every object, every piece of furniture seemed to look at him with silent judgment. The pressure in his chest increased, a sharp pain radiated down his left arm, and with it came the despair, the realization that time had run out. It was in that moment, as his body began to buckle under the weight of his own transgressions, that Thomas Caldwell finally understood the gravity of his situation. The truth, the one he had avoided and masked with hollow prayers and lavish rituals, now stood relentless, manifesting in the frailty of his flesh. He knew he was having a stroke, but this was only the beginning of the true reckoning. As his body faltered, time, the silent tyrant, paused. For Thomas, the world around him froze like a lucid dream. The leaves of the trees outside hung suspended in the air, the ticking of the clock ceased, and even the sunlight filtering through the curtains seemed trapped, unmoving. The room, once a place of comfort, now became a cold and unforgiving courtroom. In this absolute silence, Thomas found himself facing an invisible mirror where every reflection was a projection of his choices. Time hadn't stopped out of mercy, but out of a cruel necessity to show him the truth of his existence. Every second stretched into eternity, his lies surfacing, a reminder of all the truths he had avoided confronting. The memories that had haunted his mind during the day now returned with terrifying clarity. He wasn't the spiritual guide he pretended to be. He was an imposter, a manipulator who used faith as a disguise for his own greed. Every prayer recited, every piece of advice given, were facades to hide the rottenness of his soul. With trembling hands, nearly drained of strength, Thomas tried to reach for the phone on the table. The idea of a final confession, a desperate attempt at redemption, flickered briefly in his mind, like a candle in the wind. His fingers, which had counted so much dirty money, now barely managed to grip the device. He pressed the record button, but the words that could free him, remained stuck in his throat. Fear, regret, the pain of a heart heavy with guilt, created a barrier he couldn't cross. He wanted to speak, to confess before the last grain of sand fell in the hourglass of his life. But the truth he feared more than death itself now choked him, preventing him from redeeming himself. His voice, which had so often commanded the faith of others, now had no strength to utter the one thing that could save him. Darkness began to close in on Thomas, cold and unyielding. The room, once lit by the afternoon sun, turned into a dark and empty space, a reflection of the soul he had never managed to fill. He knew he was dying, and with that certainty came the bitter understanding that he was leaving without the peace he had sought in so many wrong places. His last strength faded, and he tried to rise one last time, but his body did not respond. What remained was the crushing weight of his actions, the bitter taste of regret, and the inevitability of the end. Thomas Caldwell lived his life believing he could control everything, his desires, his secrets, even the truth. But in the end, truth is a force that cannot be contained. He died trying to grasp salvation, but the lies he wove throughout his life held him captive until his last breath. In the end, truth always prevails, whether we are ready to face it or not. As Thomas exhaled his final breath, the darkness finally consumed him completely. He had spent his life running from the truth, but death found him before he could face it head-on. Thomas Caldwell exhaled his final breath, and the silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound, but a presence, thick and unyielding, that filled the room. The space, once filled with the forced laughter of lavish parties, was now steeped in a grim darkness. The clock on the wall, which had once ticked away every second of his life with relentless precision, was now motionless, its gears frozen, as if time itself had paused to mark the end of a life steeped in secrets and wrongdoing. Thomas's eyes, still open, staring into nothingness, held a final glimpse of dread and sorrow, a silent confession of what could never be spoken. I, Lucius Eternus, the angel of death, stood before him, not as a punishment, but as a witness. In one hand, I held my gleaming scythe, shining not with light, but with the reflection of pure truth. In the other, an hourglass nearly empty, each grain falling like the approach of eternity. My presence filled the room, not as a shadow, but as an inevitable force, a manifestation of the end that comes for all things. With a gentle yet firm motion, I severed the silver cord that still tied Thomas's soul to his body, freeing him from the flesh, but not from the sins he carried. And my voice, calm, deep, and heavy with sorrow, echoed in the silence. Thomas Caldwell, you believed you could live beyond the truth, that you could shape the world in your image, escape the sins you yourself created. But the truth, Thomas, the truth is a river that never stops flowing, and no matter how much you try to divert it, it always finds its way. You had chances to redeem yourself, but you never found the courage to look beyond your lies. As my words reverberated through the room, it seemed to transform into a tomb, the body that once commanded so much respect and fear now just an empty vessel, a piece of flesh devoid of life, of spirit. The imposing wealth surrounding him, the luxurious furniture, the adorned walls, everything seemed to lose its solidity, revealing itself for what it had always been, fragile illusions, powerless against the unyielding truth of death. Thomas, your life was a tapestry of lies and manipulations, each thread woven with the care of someone who believes they can control fate. But fate is not a beast to be tamed. It always follows you, silent, patient, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true form. In the end, we are all called to account for our choices, and what you've built becomes the mirror that will reflect you in your final moment. There are no more masks here, only the raw truth of a wasted life. The atmosphere around me grew heavier, as if the very air was weighed down by the gravity of my words. You see, Thomas's story is not just the story of one man, it's the story of all of you. Of your lies, your unspoken truths, your lives lived in the shadow of your own fears. So let this story be a warning to all who believe they can escape the consequences of their actions. For the truth always prevails, and life, no matter how long, is merely a prelude to what comes after. In the end, authenticity is the only path to peace, for it is the truth that will set you free. And when your moment comes, when you stand at the edge of your own abyss, ask yourself, what do you see? Who do you see? My friend, remember always, death is just the beginning. For some, it's the start of a new truth, for others, a continuation of their lies. But all of us will find ourselves in the same place, face to face with who we truly are. And one day, I will be there, waiting for you, on the day of your death.